Hello ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for watching the show. This is your Top Think Tanks review and I'm your host, Bryce Dolan. Now today on the show we're going to look at 5 different top 50 United States think tanks and look at the top stories from each one of their websites. To begin the show, the Council on Foreign Relations follows up after Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and President-elect Donald Trump met in New York City. Like many around the globe, Japanese are stunned by the election outcome and worried about what this means for the United States' role in the world. Of particular concern, of course, are the comments candidate Trump made on the campaign trail about Japan, about trade, and about U.S. alliances. But what matters now is what President-elect Trump will do to reassure Tokyo that he values the U.S.-Japan strategic partnership. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's meeting with Trump, by all accounts, was a good beginning to what will undoubtedly be a long conversation on the US-Japan alliance and the strategic challenges of Asia. Abe wasted no time in reaching out to the president-elect after the election to congratulate him and to stop by New York on his way to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting in Peru, otherwise known as APEC. For Trump, this was his first meeting with a world leader, and media from around the globe watched to see how he would handle the scrutiny. For Abe, this was the first opportunity to test just how committed the president-elect was to his campaign rhetoric. Abe hoped that his personal touch, including the gift of a golf club, would dispel fears in Tokyo that Trump wanted to abandon the alliance. Japan's prime minister succeeded in drawing out President-elect Trump, but there is far more at stake. This is, after all, America's most important relationship in Asia, an alliance that grounds the United States in an accelerating geostrategic reshuffle. President-elect Trump will need to consider how the United States can shape Asia's future, and the US-Japan alliance will be an invaluable asset. For Abe, the meeting was a high-risk gamble. Had he confronted candidate Trump, it could have intensified angst at home and provided greater opportunity for Japan's increasingly well-armed neighbors. More than a media moment, this was a significant test. A test of Trump's new role, of Abe's diplomatic skill, and ultimately of the resilience of the US-Japan alliance. Now, staying on the Trump train, ladies and gentlemen, the Brookings Institution asked the question, should we work with the devil we know against the Islamic State? President-elect Donald Trump harshly criticized President Obama's record on Syria. Obama, he claimed, allowed the Middle East to fall into chaos and let the Islamic State and other terrorist groups flourish. After his surprise victory in the presidential election, Trump suggested a dramatic reversal in U.S. policy, allying with the Syrian regime of Bashar Assad against the Islamic State. Syria is fighting ISIS, and you have to get rid of ISIS, he noted. So instead of working with the Syrian opposition and traditional allies like Saudi Arabia and Turkey to overthrow Assad and fight the Islamic State, the United States should switch sides and back the Assad regime, working with Russia against the terrorists. Although hostile to the United States, Assad is pragmatic. For example, in 2013, he agreed to rid himself of all chemical weapons in a successful effort to avoid U.S. airstrikes, though his actual compliance is incomplete, and his regime reportedly used chemical weapons in the battle for Aleppo earlier this fall. More appealing for a Trump administration, working with Assad in Syria would also extend the bromance between Trump and Putin. Indeed, discussions on Syria policy between Moscow and Trump have already begun. Trump also seems to forget the enemy part of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Assad facilitated the flow of fighters to Iraq to kill American soldiers there after the 2003 U.S. invasion. He has supported terrorism against Israel and otherwise opposed U.S. interests. And an Assad victory would be widely and correctly seen as a triumph for its biggest friend, the clerical regime in Iran. Most important, morality matters. It is one thing to ally with Stalin against Hitler when engaged in a total war. It is another to make such a devil's bargain in a lesser conflict when the US enjoys overwhelming power. Trump is proposing to embrace a mass murderer. Assad's regime is the primary culprit in a war that has killed roughly 500,000 Syrians and driven millions more into long-term exile. He promises Syria more tyranny should he triumph. There is no credible vision of reconciliation and peace. Even if the United States is willing to help make a desert and call it peace, there is no reason to trust that Assad wouldn't take brutal revenge on any former foes who return home. An Assad victory would be likely to drive even far more refugees into exile. So we see the Brookings Institution going against Trump's rhetoric and what Trump wants to do here. Trump wants to flip-flop US policy and essentially pull out of Syria and back Russia and Assad, who are fighting ISIS as well. But the Brookings Institution is saying, you know, it's one thing to ally with Stalin against Hitler. It's another thing to ally Assad in this situation. So as Trump's presidency inauguration comes closer, we'll see what happens after his first 100 days after he's inaugurated into the White House. Now, staying with Trump for just one more article today. According to the Atlantic Council, former NATO Secretary General says Article 5 must be red line of US-Russia reset. Russia would be ill-advised to take great comfort from Donald Trump's election, said George Robertson, a former Secretary General of NATO. In an interview with the New Atlanticist, Robertson exhorted NATO member states to meet the goal of spending 2% of GDP on defense in order to prevent the alliance from turning into a paper tiger. So far, only 5 of the alliance's 28 member states meet this goal. At NATO's Wales summit in 2014, all member states had pledged to meet this target. However, it is a US commitment to NATO that is at the top of the minds of most European officials these days. On the campaign trail, Trump described NATO as obsolete. He also appeared to make US military support for NATO member states conditional on whether those states had met their financial obligations to the alliance. Since his election on November 8th, Trump has told officials, including US President Barack Obama, that he will preserve the US commitment to NATO. Trump's election has been celebrated in Russia as a win for Moscow. Russian President Vladimir Putin was one of the first world leaders to congratulate Trump after his election. The president-elect has stated that he wants to mend ties with Russia. Robertson said it was all well and good for Trump to attempt a reset in the relationship with Russia. After all, he pointed out, both George W. Bush and Obama made similar attempts. Now, as Trump considers venturing down this path, Robertson had some words of advice. The red line with any potential adversary has got to be Article 5. We may see an increasingly warm relationship between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin, and that's not a bad thing, as long as we recognize that Russia has done things that we deeply disagree with, he added. So Article 5 in NATO, ladies and gentlemen, essentially is saying that all member states of that NATO alliance have to donate or use 2% of their GDP on their country's defenses, on their country's military, because they want to avoid becoming a paper tiger. Essentially, what that is they want to be an alliance where they can tell a country that's out of line to stop it, or to quit abusing their civilians, or quit violating human rights, or they're going to be attacked by these 20-some member states of NATO. If they become a paper tiger, all they can really do is serve papers to people and be like, hey, you better stop it or we're going to write you up. You know, that's not being able to protect and defend countries and innocent civilians is a lot more intimidating rather than just receiving a piece of paper saying, hey, cut it out. So even though Trump wants to reverse the US policy in Syria, it looks like he is wanting to preserve the NATO alliance, which is great news for the NATO member states and the United States itself. Now next, the Afghan government should develop a security plan to better protect minority Shia during high-profile public events, Human Rights Watch said today. Now on November 21st, 2016, a suicide bomber killed at least 32 worshippers, including children, and injured 50 others at a Shia mosque in Kabul during observance of the religious ceremony of Arbaeen. Now, since July, a wave of sectarian suicide attacks has injured or killed more than 500 members of the Shia community. Insurgents who affiliate themselves with the Islamic State, also known as ISIS, claimed responsibility for this attack, their fourth on gatherings by Afghanistan's Shia community since July 2016. Now, the group also said they carried out 2 attacks during the Shia community, or the Shia ceremony of Ashura, on October 11th in Kabul and October 12th in the northern province of Balkh. That altogether killed at least 32 people. The group also claimed a July 23rd attack against a demonstration by mainly Hazara Shia in Kabul, killing at least 85 and injuring 413 more, the deadliest attack in Afghanistan on civilians since 2002. ISIS has stepped up its horrific and unlawful attacks on Shia public gatherings, making no place safe, said Patricia Gossman, senior Afghanistan researcher at Human Rights Watch. Now, the government, Shia leaders, and civil society groups should work together to develop appropriate ways to improve security during vulnerable public and religious gatherings so that Shia community members can exercise their basic rights. Insurgents who are responsible for atrocities targeting a specific ethnic or religious community as part of an attack on a civilian population are committing crimes against humanity, Gossman said. So, Human Rights Watch in Afghanistan today calling out ISIS and other terrorist members who are attacking the Shia community, and essentially they're calling on Afghanistan authorities to help protect these public gatherings where people are just extremely vulnerable and out in the open. It's like going to church on a Sunday here in the United States. If you're a Christian, you're a Catholic, whatever, you go to mass, you go to church on Sunday morning, you're sitting there, then all of a sudden all chaos just breaks out all around you and the church explodes. I mean, I couldn't even imagine something like that happening to me. So this is good. They're calling on the government to help protect these people and civil society groups to help protect these innocent people who are just trying to exercise their basic rights. Now, to end the show, ladies and gentlemen, the Rand Corporation says what ISIS leaves behind in Mosul will reveal a lot. It could assist authorities in identifying those who were its fighters, enforcers, and collaborators, and help identify the foreign fighters enabling countries they came from to head off new terrorist plots. It should offer a record and physical evidence of the ISIS atrocities, which should be documented, preserved, and published. Collecting, analyzing, and disseminating this material will be a major effort, one of the most important as the city is liberated. Iraqis, for reasons of sovereignty and language, will take the lead, but U.S. and allied intelligence services will be deeply involved and can bring in additional resources and forensic skills and liaison with other services that can quickly check and exploit information. ISIS economics is another area of extreme interest. How did ISIS continue to fund its operations, even during the bombing campaign? Who are the corrupt individuals and officials the terrorist organization dealt with in Iraq and abroad? Iraqi authorities and allies will also want to destroy any left-behind networks or enablers and enforcers of future terrorist undergrounds. Who are the victims of this occupation, and who are the willing collaborators? To build a complete picture of the occupation will require extensive interviews among the refugee population. So not only are the Iraqi forces and the militias that are backed by U.S. forces going to free Mosul of ISIS, they're also going to find out a lot about ISIS. And that's the one problem that countries have combating terrorist terrorist groups, ladies and gentlemen, like ISIS, is because they go underground for a number of years, they build up strength, and then they just kind of pop up out of nowhere and start attacking and taking over and taking ground. So this is huge, not just for America, not just for the United States, but for the entire world, to figure out how these terrorist groups network, how they collaborate, how they stay alive after being bombarded and sanctioned and being cut off from supplies. How do they still manage to get weapons? How do they still manage to get food and water? How do they still manage to get medical supplies? All of those questions could be answered when they finally free Mosul completely of ISIS. So not only are they recapturing the capital, they're going to gain a lot of useful information. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for the show today. If you want to look more into any of these articles, you can find the links directly to these articles below in the description. While you're doing that, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a time when a new video gets posted. Give us a like on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. But that does it for the show today, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for watching your Top Think Tanks review. I was your host, Bryce Dolan.